This is Parent Boss Leader. Parent Boss Leader. And here's your host. She's a courageous voice for women, parents, and modern workforce leaders alike. She's a keynote speaker and proud mother of two, the Vice President of Sales and Strategy for ATR International, Laura R. Munson.
Hello, everyone. We rise by lifting others. Famous quote by Robert Ingersoll. I think that quote is perfect to define you, Greg Muccio. It's such an honor to have you on the podcast today. So Greg of Southwest Airlines, Managing Director, Talent Acquisition, has lifted many people up in his career, been responsible for key changes, initiatives, and we're going to be talking about nuggets about being a powerful leader as well as advice for job seekers. So welcome to the podcast, Parent Boss Leader, and I'm Laura Munson, your host. But before we jump in, Greg, I'd love for everyone to get to know you a little bit better. Can you give us a little overview of who you are, where you're from, background, experience?
Thanks, Laura. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm as close to a native Texan as you can be without being one. 6 months old when we moved here.
Wow.
I do have a daughter who does like to remind me that she was born on the soil. So that always stings just a little bit. But yeah, I've lived in the Dallas area my entire life, and was one of those individuals that landed in HR, landed in recruiting, if you will, not by intention, but just by default. As I joke, I just was bad enough at enough other things that kind of landed on this and ended up being here. But I got was actually in a staffing agency in sales and finally had that moment where like, no, it's just not really I'm not good at it and I don't really enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And they asked if, would I be interested in recruiting? And I was like, sure, I'll learn it, do this. And it was great. And then 21 and a half years ago, I got an opportunity to come to Southwest as a recruiter and hung around long enough and said yes to enough things that now I get to lead all talent acquisition. So
amazing. Thank you. I think it's so true when you say kind of falling into recruiting. I think a lot of us, I connect with that as well, who get into recruiting. Because when we're kids, we don't think, I want to grow up and be a recruiter.
Right.
It kind of comes to us, right?
There's no cool TV shows or movies about like people recruiting. So yeah, it's not commonplace. Yeah.
Wow. I think we need to start a show, Greg. Actually, I think we need some type of series. We'll table that and talk later.
We'll work on it. Yeah.
Yeah. But as some of our listeners may know, I recently did a podcast as well with Whitney Eichinger, who also works with Southwest Airlines. We had a really good conversation about imposter syndrome. And what I think's amazing is how long both of you've been with Southwest Airlines. It really speaks volumes about the culture, and you've seen a lot. You've created a lot of change within the company. So I wanted to dig in a little bit from your background, really, as you started as a recruiter and moving up through management. So let's say from senior recruiter to team lead to manager, and now managing director of talent acquisition. What do you think are some key lessons that you learned along the way?
It's especially at Southwest, I think, but I don't think it's limited to that. It's certainly leadership is really about the people, right? And if you don't get that, if you're not in it for that, there's, at the end of the day, there's not a lot left, in my opinion, right? And so, I think that's just a big piece, and I think, for me, certainly along the journey, even making it, more and more about the people. I think anybody, when you're early in your career, you're wanting to get noticed and you're trying to do things and that kind of thing. And we're humans and that's how we're designed. But I felt like when I began to kind of care less about, the attention that I was needed or getting or anything like that, and it was just about like that elevating others. Not only did it make it more fun and it was helpful for others, but the piece of it for me took off faster as well.
Wow.
So it's kind of interesting how, or ironic how I guess that part really works out.
Isn't it funny? Because if you think about it, it's people leader, but it sometimes takes time for people to really get that, moving from productivity metrics and then realizing, oh yes, I am a leader of people. And you really have embodied that. I mean, following you, people who know you, that's why I picked that quote to open us up. We rise by lifting others. I mean, you have such a huge team underneath you now. So I think that's a really good nugget for all leaders to hear, to focus on the people first, secondary, the productivity, right?
Right.
And then the rest follows. So taking on more responsibility and leadership, did that come naturally for you? Or did you ever take on more without taking on too much? Or what was the progression like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's very timely because I've, as I am still, working and developing, all the various folks underneath me, and we have this conversations, or even some of our recruiters that are like, hey, how do I do this? And I said, here's the first thing that we did is when opportunity comes, I said yes, and then determined that I'd figure it out. Because it's just, if you say no, or, hey, I need to wrap this up, or, I'm working on this over here. And if I can just have time, I'm like, it's just not going to come back. That's just a really big risk. And so for me, it was constantly just saying yes to things and then figuring it out. And then ultimately to make that work, you have to be, you have to get really good at prioritizing. You have to get really good at adding capacity, right? And that comes in a lot of different forms, whether it's doing certain things better, delegating more, stop doing things. And then I think one of the really big key cruxes is that you have to be able to start saying no, or giving up really good things so you can get those really great things. And I always do a visual with my team when I'm talking, that it's like, if I have my hands closed like this, I cannot, you could be handing me a bag of $1 million with $1 million in it. I can't hold it. Only when I do this, only when I open my hands can I get more. And I use the examples of, there were multiple times when there were things that, I had created, right, or heavily involved, that were my babies, and loved it. And what I had to make the determination is, okay, if I'm going to continue to grow and take on and get great stuff, I've got to create capacity. And so what and the way that it just worked out was, okay, I gave this stuff up. It allowed other people to then grow, which was huge. And then they also made everything significantly better than what I had done, which was, is great. But then it also freed me up to begin to continue to take on other things. And I think I think those are the keys, kind of with that is, it's just, what's the, carpe diem, right? Is, seize the day, seize the moment. I think that's just super, super important to be prepared for that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. My next question would be more about, say, common mistakes that you've made along the way. Anything that you could maybe warn people who are new in management leadership roles along the way. And I even think of how you said learning about people leadership, making people the key focus. But can we drill down maybe a little bit on that? What were mistakes that you made? How did you correct it? Practicals.
Yeah. I think, so, you always hear this, kind of line when you get into leadership type of thing, or, you get on a new team or whatever it is. It's like, take the time, get to know your team, get to know them as people. And that's 100%. What you also have to do is allow them to get to know you. And that was, I had a really particular mistake when at one of the point in times when I got some added responsibility, because the teams that I was leading, I knew really well. They knew me, they knew my personality, they knew, okay, he's sarcastic, he's this, but he'll champion you, but here's how you can take him. And the people that I took on, I knew them, but just didn't know them, right? And just really kind of realized that, okay, I hadn't taken the time to dig in deeper with them, but also for them to know where I was coming from, why certain things were important to me, what why I might like things a certain way, or what my expectations would be for them, but also, hey, what I was willing to do for them and all that. And so luckily I got another opportunity or more responsibility after that, and really kind of put those words into practice. And it just it went swimmingly well, kind of in my opinion, because as I just began to do those folks, is just kind of spend time with them a little bit and just kind of understand that it was going to be all right, but B, here's kind of how what I'm willing to do, what I'm open to, make sure that they knew that they had the freedom to ask questions at any point in time, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point that you bring up. Often you know of people in an organization, you might recognize them, been on meetings together, but really knowing them is a different story. I notice even to relate with my team, often when we have one-on-ones, we'll joke, we'll talk about things, the weather, the news, and then we'll jump into weekly chats, connecting, what's going on. But something that has been really important to put in there is asking them, how are you? How do you manage stress? Or
right.
How do you work best? How could I support you? I think they're really good questions to know and understand someone. That is so good when you bring that up. So my next question, and I think I already have the answer, is what is your management style? How would you describe yourself?
It's a good question, and I don't know that I can be, or that I would want to be fully pegged, because here's why. I'm a very big fan of situational leadership, if that makes sense, right? And so, because that's the key. I lead this organization with a lot of different things, and on any given day, we have 300 people, right? And they're all different, and they all have things and different ways to get someplace, different things that are important to them. So I definitely would say, I would definitely say I'm not into micromanaging. I don't like to get in the weeds. Now, there are times when you've got to identify that maybe someone doesn't truly know how to do something. And so that micromanaging can get a bad word, where it's like, I'm not doing this because I don't trust you. I'm doing this because, I'm going to hold the back of the bicycle, until you're safe and comfortable and confident in riding it yourself. So it has nothing to do with, a lack of trust. It's, I want you to know that you have that confidence. But more often, it's more about a vision, sharing that vision, connecting that with them, and then sort of allowing them to figure out how to get there. And then I'm really then big into, okay, how do I remove obstacles for them? How do I reduce friction, and spend more of my time doing those things.
Yeah, well said. I think when I think of leadership styles, I often think of four main categories, the visionary, democratic, transformational, coaching. For example, visionary, it's a manager who communicates purpose and direction that employees believe in, want to follow. There's democratic, the majority rules. So whoever has the loudest voice, that's who rules. Transformational, they're the innovators. They push employees out of their comfort zone. Or coaching strives to improve employees' long-term professional development. And I think about you, it's true when you say situational leadership, you probably pivot and have a little bit of all of those type of leadership abilities. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the one that I would probably least identify perhaps with is the democratic, but I think I take a different, like I at 100% think of what's that impact, how are they going to feel or whatever. But just like yourself, when you at certain roles, like, hey, you've got to make the best decision for the organization, and there are times that your team just doesn't have all the information, and sometimes you can't share all of it with them. So there's an element that just says, hey, do you trust me, right? Do you trust me? And let's look at back history, but here's what you're going to do. But yeah, and then yeah, I think the last two go really well together. I think I would say, I certainly like to be innovative, and I think that comes maybe in the bigger vision, and then people get kind of attracted to that, and then it's about to the point, stretching people, doing them, helping them understand, well, okay, you want to get here, here's one of the things that you do. And then what I'll tell my team a lot of times, I was like, if I'm giving them stuff, I'm like, you tell me when you need to tap and not get any more, because what I don't want to do, I think I don't know what your ceiling is right now. I can't see it. And so I'm not going to be the one that puts it on you. You're going to be the one that says, don't give me any more or whatever. And I think that's, I think that part's, really important. And then, the coaching piece is really, really important too. And I think that's where the situational leadership part is really, really key, right? Is that, okay, what's the scenario? Is this person, this could be somebody that has worked for me for 10 years and I think they're amazing, but am I giving them a new task that I want them to grow, but they've never done this before? And so just because they're awesome and amazing doesn't mean that on day one, they're going to be knocking it out of the park, right? And so that's just where you have to understand, okay, how do I coach them? I want to give them enough freedom, but I also want to make sure that they feel supported and can get where they need to get.
Absolutely. When I think of you, I think we've known each other maybe about 10 years now. You're kind of famous, Greg, in the staffing world. I know you came from staffing originally, but you helped develop the in-house MSP program at Southwest Airlines. And that always caught my attention. Being vice president, ATR International, we work with a lot of different companies across the US. And what we found is the in-house MSP programs, they have been amazing with pushing initiatives forward for hiring, for acquiring the right talent. But I wanted to ask you a little bit, since Southwest is famous for this, can you speak to how you developed the program? What was it like creating it? And how was it even leading a project like that?
It was one of those things that was a nice mixture of, fun and energizing, and then scary, all sort of at the same time, because we were definitely going out on a bit of a thin branch, and I think one of the things that we did really early on with the team, as we began to say, hey, yeah, let's go for it, was I said sort of the vision or approach was like, we are going to act like we are a service organization, and that every year our contract is up, and the executives for Southwest are going to determine whether or not they renew us as their MSP. And I go, that's the approach that we need to have, not we're internal and we get entitled to that. And then I've really kind of carried that forward now to my entire TA organization. Is just, I'm like, we're a service organization. I've built us, and with a ton of help of making us like we are a very, very full service, well-developed staffing agency with one customer, Southwest Airlines. And every year the executives are going to determine whether or not they want to renew us for a year. And that's the approach. That's the approach that we need to have. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of learning, but it was great. It was, I think, today I was just talking to some of my team a little bit this week. We're in the neighborhood of about 75 to 80% of our staff aug roles are self-sourced. We're even getting into, some kind of self-sourcing things that would normally have been like a prof service pod or whatever, just because, we can. And then I think a big piece of it, right, is just certainly was a combination of both our brand and culture. It just seemed like the right idea for us to go do it. And luckily we did have a few early wins that just allowed us to, buoy that, and versus, trying to overcome, a mistake.
Yeah. Major cost savings too, probably for Southwest Airlines as well, as opposed to having third party. So that's very amazing. Do you mind if we pivot a bit to job seeker advice, Greg? What do you think?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. People always have questions. When I notice when I do podcasts, or even in my field, talking with candidates, they always want to have those hidden gems of how to land the roles that they're looking for. So a big part of your project working on the in-house MSP was sourcing, hiring. So if we're getting into the candidate's shoes, thinking through their perspective, what do you think that is the best advice for them to position themselves when they're reaching out to a company, when they want to work for them?
Yeah, I think, what's amazing, or so beneficial, today, that wasn't, even available, 2 decades ago, and probably, even 10 years ago, certainly wasn't relevant. It's just all the information that you can go get, right? That you can go see, and you can go learn about on the company and those sorts of things. And so I think that part's really, really still valuable. And that's twofold, right? Because certainly that's great for you to learn about a seeker, but I think Southwest is a great place to work. It's still not for everybody. Okay. And that's okay. But so I think that research is really, really important to know, hey, is this a right place for me to be? Does it fit, culturally and what's important to me, work styles, and hear all that. So I think that part's really important. I think too, what's really, companies, so I always tell candidate, flip the script and think of what the hiring leader, department, company, or whatever, what they're thinking, right? And they have an open position. And here's the reality is when any company has an open spot, they're losing money. Okay, because that person, whoever is supposed to be in that seat, is doing something. They've so much so that they've assigned a salary range to it. They've actually placed a value on it, right? And so if you look at that, whatever that is, every day that's open, they're losing money, right? Some way, shape, or form. And so if you think about it that way, then you can sort of how to attack the problem, if you will, or to put your best foot forward, which is, okay, how can you help? How can you ensure that or show that you'll hit the ground running, right? Because that's the other thing. Companies invest in a lot in training and those particular pieces. And so if you're somebody that they feel like can shorten, that runway, no pun intended, to being, fully functional, that's huge as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I liked that pun, Greg, because even on your LinkedIn profile, and you mentioned it today on podcast, you say that you approach your job with enthusiasm and sense of humor. So that is funny. What makes you excited about helping job seekers?
I kind of two things. I think I think of myself, my younger self, when I was in those shoes, and at one point in time had gotten laid off, and even had gotten into a spot where probably was just felt a little bit hopeless on those kind of things. So I think hope is really huge, and so for me, when I can help somebody out and give them a little bit of hope in what to do in the direction, and then because then that'll just begin to snowball. And even if it's not that job, but if they walk away and go, wow, I feel like I did better in that interview, or how I put my foot forward, whatever it may be, I feel good. And sometimes you have to even show it to some people, right? To go, okay, great, I get, we've done a lot of things internally, and we had this career mobility team, and they were lamenting, at the end of the year, it's like, okay, we just haven't placed as many people as we've won. They placed a lot, for just only been doing this for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, okay, well, you helped these 8 people here. They all were putting in for the same job. Only one of them could get it. So you need to do your math right. But I said, start looking backwards and going, that's not a question. How many of the people that got into the final interview the time before they didn't? How many people got into a first interview the time before they didn't? How many people got their resume looked at or a phone screen the time before you did it? And how did you help that? And so some of it's just that building process, right, with individuals to kind of give them confidence. And so that's what I get out of it. I think it's great. I think anytime you can share a little bit of wisdom or nugget to help somebody just course correct or just feel better about the direction they're going, that's I enjoy doing that for sure.
I love that. And I think that people who are listening are job seekers sometimes themselves. So it really is far reaching to hear from a major leader in talent acquisition, kind of your inner thinkings, like your altruistic ways, how you are excited to help them. I think sometimes job seekers can really feel it as this daunting task, and they don't know the people behind the names, even on LinkedIn.
Right.
So let's, if we were to look at a person, say this person has about 10 years experience and they really want to get into leadership, a managerial type role. What do you think that person should be looking for in today's market?
Yeah, here's one of the things that I think is really, really dangerous, and it's existed forever. And it still exists today, and that's you gotta be really, really cautious about not getting hung up on titles, right? Because there's just not unfortunately there's not just a uniform set of titles that crosses all kinds of organizations. And I remember in my early days of recruiting at Southwest, I would get frustrated at times because somebody may be a senior something, and I had a spot, and they're like, well, I'm a senior. But then you talk to them about all the other details, the scope of their work, the things that they're doing, and even at times the compensation, and going, we're better at all of those things. It's just, this is how our hierarchy works or whatever. So I think that's really, really big. I think that's just really short-term thinking with folks to do versus what's that opportunity? What can I learn from that? How can I grow? Those types of things I think are really, really important when you're maybe if you're looking at something along those kinds of leadership and even just, put on your altruistic hat and go, hey, how could I help this company or the people that are on that team? Because the likelihood is if you come in and do that, the other things will take care of themselves. It tends to work out that way. It's not perfect every time, all companies, but I think that's the big piece, right? Is just really looking at and going, hey, does this opportunity align to my values, how I like to operate, and is there an opportunity for me to make a difference, not only with the organization, but with the people that I'd be leading?
Yeah, I think very well said. I'm going to ask one more question. I think it's probably the $1 million question for a lot of applicants who actually are selected for interview. If you were to offer a couple tips, tricks, anything for job seekers when they're going into an interview, if you're preparing a candidate for this interview, what do you think are some of the best pieces of advice that you could share?
I would start with, a lot of times, when people have a fear of interviewing, right, it is like, oh, I just don't know what they're going to ask. And that's actually not true. They're not going to ask about you, and you're the foremost authority on you. And so you just need to be prepared to come in and do that. And so one of the things I always tell people is like, hey, if I told you to take a piece of paper out and write down what you consider your 5 biggest strengths, you write them down. My next question is going to be, that is awesome. Those are 5 amazing strengths. Now prove it.
Yeah.
You can't just say I'm good at something without being able to describe, real examples. And so that's one of the things I always tell people. It's like, okay, if you're going to say, hey, I'm a really good team player. Okay, well, what does that mean? First of all, right? How would you describe it to somebody else so they know? And then how would you give an example of you being a great team player? If you can't do that, then don't say that you're a great team player, because you can't really back it up. I think that's one of the first and foremost things to be able to do. I think a couple of others is silence is okay. So don't try to just fill that void. Continuing talk, be succinct, right? And what you're saying, be confident in it. And then lastly, I think it's really, really important for you as the interviewee to have questions for that team. That's probably always one of my biggest disappointments when I interview somebody and they're like, I don't have any questions. And I'm like, you're just like, oh, that's too bad, because that's really your chance. That's actually your better chance to shine than anything, because it shows how you're thinking about the work, the job, the questions that you have. And it could be, okay, hey, hiring leader, what would success look like in the person that you're hiring for this role in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? And what's great about that is you're showing you're thinking of that, but if there's a second interview or you get hired, they just told you what good looks like, right? And so you get to start off with those kind of things. And so to me, it's just really, I think those are really, really important. Those are probably the big 3 things that I would tell people to do.
Yeah. They're good 3 things. In fact, in my industry, I'm often prepping candidates how to go into interviews, and you hit on some of the biggest areas. It shows not even just a missed opportunity, not asking questions at the end. It also can be communicated as lack of engagement or lack of interest in the company that the person's interviewing for. So I think
I will just one thing there, Laura. I have literally had people that had a mediocre interview, but saved it and moved on because of the questions that they had. Because what I hope and what I'm trying to teach my team and do some things right is people are going to be nervous in interviews. And so I want to be very, very cautious that we don't get too heavy-handed or over screening, right, when that happens. Now, the problem is, right, is when you're interviewing, you got to realize that that's a competition for a job. So you've got X number of other people that are putting in, and if all things on the piece of paper that's your resume or work history or whatever are equal or close, then it's really going to kind of come down to that. But it's those moments in that time where you have a chance to actually engage, have a conversation with that person and show, to your point, hey, I'm really interested in this, and here's the kind of thinking that I bring to the table. And so I think it's it's a art, if you will, that just so many folks don't do.
Yeah, very well said. And something that I think is a little bit ironic, but amazing at the same time, is even today, you answered all my questions. We're in kind of an interview. It may not be for a job, but you really did illustrate that, how you went into your experience, calm way, interjected humor, had examples to back it up. So I think that you are teaching job seekers how to answer questions too, even in our podcast. Gosh, Greg, I'll tell you, I really respect you as a leader. Hashtag fan. You've been amazing over the years watching you at Southwest. I think you've given a lot of valuable nuggets, gems to people in leadership roles, kind of looking at you as a leader. And then also for job seekers, huge group out there. I think it's great advice. So thank you so much for joining today. It was an honor to have you. And to our listeners, if you've liked what you've heard, like and subscribe for more information on the podcast. And Greg is on LinkedIn. Welcome to connect with him. And I am as well. So thank you for coming, Greg. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Laura.